News, trends, controversial opinions, and everything you could ever ask for in our weekly podcast. Let's get into this subject. Hey guys, welcome to our daily podcast. First of all, I want to thank everyone who is listening and welcome anyone who is discovering this account for the first time. Today, I'm here with my friend Tati, who wanted to participate in one of our sessions. Welcome, Tati.
Hi, thanks for letting me join you. I actually have been wanting to have a chance to participate since you first started making this.
You should have told me earlier. Anyways, we are here now. So, recently, I have been reading this book called The Bluest Eye. Have you read it?
Yes, our English teacher made us read this book as an assignment for last semester. It's surprisingly pretty enjoyable, even if it explores some really strong subjects.
Yeah, I actually have a split mind about it. On one hand, I believe it's incredibly well written, and the topics being as explicit as they are make an impact in the reader, who ends up educating themselves more in matters of race, for example. But, on the other hand, I was completely drained the whole time reading it. I mean, there wasn't even one moment where something remotely positive happened to a character.
I get what you're saying. You really need to brave yourself up for reading this type of literature. So, I have a question for us to answer that one of my classmates asked me earlier. Do you think this is the bluest book you have ever read?
Are you talking about in a sexual kind of way or a sad way?
Could be both. Wouldn't you agree?
I guess you are right. For instance, if we are talking about it sexually, to be quite honest, I don't think this is the most sexual book I have ever read for a reason. I am aware that this question could have many possible answers, but as for how I see things, I don't think the book is inherently sexual.
How? I mean, there are a lot of scenes including sexual behavior.
I know, but even though there are some explicit scenes, most of them are recounting abuses or sexual encounters told from a perspective of women's shame or unpleasant feelings. I don't think the book is trying to talk about sex itself, but more about the emotional consequences of abuse in children and women. Hence, I wouldn't classify this book as sexual.
Oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. I was going to say that this might have been one of the most sexual books I have read since I take account of the sexual abuses as part of the storyline as a whole, and not some kind of message as you are saying. But I totally see your point of view.
Well, I reckon that I shouldn't ignore that these scenes, after all, talk about sexual encounters, but I still think it is more about making an impact than being sexual.
Okay, I see what you're talking about.
And what about the sad part? Do you think The Bluest Eye is the saddest book you have ever read to this day?
My answer must be a resounding yes.
I can see you're very sure of that.
I mean, aren't you?
I'm not altogether sure I agree with you.
Why?
You go first.
Well, first of all, it was just consuming to read it. As you have said before, it just drained my energy having to read about all these devastating storylines of abuse and racism and knowing that there is a high chance that someone has gone through the tellings of this book. And although I may not relate to the sexual abuse or racism topics, I can tell what it's like to be in a reality where you want to fit in so bad that you are willing to sacrifice your own identity for.
I get what you're trying to say. I would also like to add, as you are mentioning relatability, that I was able to find myself in this kind of mother and daughter relationship portrayed in the book, and how the children try so hard to live up to their mother's standards but just not being able to. And in reality, after all, you still can hate your mother because you end up going back to all those times where she showed you her compassionate sides as to compensate for all the abuse, usually in times where you have been injured or sick.
And you still don't think this is the bluest book you have ever read?
I don't know. Coming to think about it, maybe it is. I must reckon that I haven't given much thought, really. You were talking earlier and I interrupt you. Go on, please.
Thanks. As I was saying, this novel does an excellent job transmitting this feeling of wanting to belong but not being able to. For instance, we have Pauline, who ended up sacrificing her own family just so she could be accepted and loved for the people she worked for, and her daughter Piccola, who wants to change her eyes so as to be found beautiful. I think society tries to mold people into what its standard of beautiful and perfection says. And we ended up changing ourselves just so we can be accepted, not seeing that we are losing parts of us in the process. Well, the thing is, this novel shows this process in such an explicit way that let us recognize ourselves in the characters, but also realize that we are repeating their patterns. Basically, I think it's realization of our personal loss that makes this book so sad.
That is a lot to sink in. Your thoughts on this are really interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Thanks. Wishfully, anyone listening to this will think the same. Well, I guess we better start summing up. I believe it's time for us to end this session.
Yeah, thanks guys for listening and we hope you have enjoyed it. Bye!
Bye!